Across Libya, protesters are still calling for Gaddafi to leave, with reports of security forces killing civilians and using African militias to crush the Libyans' revolt. Will Muammar Gaddafi's regime prevail where others fell to the will of the people? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Witnesses from Libya's second largest city of Benghazi say that dozens of people killed on Saturday when troops opened fire on anti-government protesters in the city. They also spoke of snipers firing at protesters from rooftops and a number of foreign mercenaries from sub-Saharan Africa being brought in to attack protesters. Some of those so-called mercenaries were caught by protesters and confessed that they had received instructions to fire live bullets at demonstrators. Stephanie Decker has more.
The streets of Benghazi on Saturday, a fierce battle and the scene of death and violence.
I have cousins who are in the streets whose friends have been killed right in front of them. The killings are just going on. Bodies are piled everywhere. The numbers that they announce on TV are nowhere to compare. They're just firing people. Sniper shooters are on the rooftop. Every house, every single house.
In the morgue, one man takes a last look at his relative and murmurs, he was not armed. Also from Benghazi, this video, which we cannot independently verify, claims to show what protesters believe is a mercenary, a hired killer, contracted by the Libyan regime to attack demonstrators.
These are the mercenaries. These are the people he's using to help him. He has been shot in the heart.
And the unrest is spreading across the country. Here in Al-Baidiyah, thousands gather near the main mosque, another city rocked by days of protests against the country's leadership. Chanting "There's no God but Allah," mourners carry the body of one of those killed. And there's more chaos. Anti-Gaddafi graffiti sprayed on walls and a voice through a loudspeaker saying, "There's no state here." Reports of casualties are running high and constantly rising. The city's hospital overwhelmed. The morgue is filled with bodies, and more are still coming. On Libyan state television, the first signs that the country is in difficulty. Images of burning buildings, a result of the protests. They're blaming foreign forces for trying to destabilize the country. But while thousands of Libyans remain on the streets in various cities across the country, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore their calls. Stephanie Decker for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now to talk more about this issue are our guests. In London, Ashur Shamis, he's a Libyan opposition activist. In Nairobi, Ali Khan Satu, a financial analyst and the CEO of Rich Investment. And also in London, Ian Black, Middle East editor at The Guardian. Gentlemen, I want to welcome all of you to the programme. Ashur Shamis, if I could start with you. Now, we know information coming out of Libya has been pretty sketchy over the last few days, given the wide media and communication crackdown inside the country. Just tell us a little bit about some of the accounts that you've been hearing about what's happening from inside Libya.
Well, what we are hearing is that tension is growing all over the country, that there is a strong opposition in the eastern parts of the country. This is a confrontation between the army and the people, and there are new reinforcements coming into Benghazi, led by Gaddafi's own son, Khamis, to crush the revolt in Benghazi. In Tripoli, there are groups trying to gather and go and protest against the spilling of blood of Libyans in the eastern province, and they are peaceful people. They have no guns, no ammunition, no weapons at all, and they want to simply say, you know, stop the bloodshed in the east, where at least 300 people have been killed and many wounded. So that's one aspect. There's also in the many cities in the west, including Zintan, Gherian, Zawiya, Misrata. These are all have seen protesters in the streets and have seen the army or the military power meeting them in the streets.
So it's not just confined to the eastern cities then, as we've been reporting for the most part. So you're saying that it is in certain western cities as well. Does it? Is there the potential for this to explode further to something far bigger and perhaps to Tripoli?
This is the most the most countrywide, the most widespread revolt against Gaddafi ever, and it's still growing. The people have reached a point of no return by the killing of the Libyans in Benghazi and in Beda and in other parts. So the situation now has become irreversible as far as the people are concerned. They are going all the way, but also the regime is becoming is coming stronger onto the people.
Ian Black in London, does this fit in with some of what you've been hearing as well, that this isn't just confined to the eastern cities of Libya?
Well, clearly information is coming out in all sorts of ways. The situation's pretty confused, but we do hear more and more that things are spreading. It's obviously been concentrated in the east, in the Benghazi area, and of course people have pointed all the time to the significance of that being a long way from Tripoli, and the big question being whether the trouble, the unrest, the violence will spread to the capital. It's very, very hard to make a judgment about it because of the very, very fragmentary nature of the information and reports that, although often very, very vivid, can't be verified and can't be quantified. And the casualty figures do seem to be going up, and every day that this has been going on, what seemed perhaps like a large or inflated figure in the afternoon or the evening was actually under the figure that was arrived at by the following morning. So there's an element of time lag as well as information is collated and disseminated. But I agree with Shamis, this seems to be quite the most serious threat to the Gaddafi regime in all the 41 years that he's been in power.
But do you think, sorry to interrupt, do you think that this has, as he was saying earlier, do you think that this has reached the point of no return, that there's no going back now for people there?
I mean, I honestly think it's impossible to say. People are obviously, furious, angry, full of fury at what their own government has done to them. But whether it's possible for this to somehow to subside and for people to be placated with measures from central government, it's hard to say. Very interesting, I thought today, to see the appeal by Libyan religious leaders for an end to the violence, suggesting perhaps that was something that the regime would have to take notice of. It's very hard to get a sense of independent voices being able to influence the very idiosyncratic Libyan system anyway. So any evidence of people saying, look, this has got to stop, this is enough, who aren't actually themselves the target of state violence, must be significant in some way. I mean, the other thing is that in the last 24 hours, the world has woken up to this. Maybe at the beginning it was not paid very much attention. There was what's been going on in Bahrain at the same time, Bahrain being much, much more accessible and in a much more strategic location than the remote towns of eastern Libya. But I think overnight we've seen Western governments, in Britain certainly, waking up to the dimensions of this. So how much longer this can be sustained is hard to say. So I don't know whether a line has been crossed that's irreversible. I cannot say myself.
Ali Khan Satchu, Libya is perhaps not as politically significant in the region as Egypt is, but economically it certainly is. It sits on the largest known oil reserves in Africa. How much of that is a factor in all of this? And can this regime, given the vast amounts of oil wealth they have, can they perhaps use any of that to pacify the situation there?
Can I contextualize it and start off by saying, if you look at the North African arc starting from Egypt all the way to Nigeria, Libya has 75% of the known oil reserves, estimated to be about 47.3 billion barrels of oil, which is in excess of $4 trillion in the ground. On top of that, they control, it is said, FX reserves of about 100 billion. And given the nature of the Hermit Kingdom, the fact that information does not come out I suspect that number is a serious undercount of the types of dollars that Colonel Gaddafi has in his in his purse. So they're a big player, and you can see that play out in so many different ways. Not so long ago, Hannibal, one of Colonel Gaddafi's sons, got in trouble in Switzerland. Colonel Gaddafi threatened a run on the Swiss banking system, and he got an abject apology within 24 hours. Furthermore, Libya is heavily invested in places like Italy. Colonel Gaddafi has sort of spread his tentacles in a very, very clever way. He might look idiosyncratic, he might appear quite extraordinary and clownish, but when you look at his maneuvers in the financial markets, they've been very, very clever, quite astute, and always pushing the boundaries of Libya's power play. With respect to the economy, I think it's been a fiefdom for so long. It's been run as the personal property of Gaddafi Inc. And I think it's very difficult for such a regime to make the types of concessions at the speed with which the 21st century requires. And I would question whether he is ready himself to make those concessions. You know, psychologically, I don't know where he is right now. You know, does he think that these are ingrates who are rising up against him and they need to be put down? It's interesting that he's using the sub-Saharan African militias, because there are about 500,000 Africans within Libya out of the 6.5 million population, and he's extended enormous influence in Africa as well. So my point would be, yes, he can make the concessions, but I wonder whether after 41 years in power, he has the skill set to make those concessions that are required at this time. And he, for example, might very well think it's a black box. It's been a black box all these years, a black hole of information. And I think we're first going to see a move towards a much more violent response. You don't have a live feed there, for example, which I think was the game changer in Egypt. But overall, he's got a lot more money in his hand. He's got plenty of influence around the globe. And really, in terms of that whole African area, all the oil, not the gold, all the oil is practically in Libya.
All right, let's put some of that to Ashur Shamis. I mean, Ali Khan Sachu mentioned there, and you mentioned it earlier as well, the reports of these mercenaries and militias coming from outside to quell the protests. Is that a reflection that he knows the power of the army and he doesn't trust them to put down these protests, given that they're being asked to essentially shoot at their own people? If he gets people from outside to do the job, paid people, then this is a way for him to get around that.
Absolutely. Now, the fight in Libya is between Gaddafi's clan, Gaddafi's sons, Gaddafi's tribal acolytes, and the people of Libya. Now, it is not between Libyans and Libyans. It's not between the Libyan army and the Libyan people. There is no Libyan army. The Libyan army is in the hands of his sons, and it is a collection of groups that has no similarity to an army. And then he is merely interested in defending himself and defending his position. I agree with the last speaker that he has a lot of clout and he is playing with that, but how strong is his position to master that clout, and how is he able to master? You know, when the people are in a
well, what do you think? Is he able to master this? I mean, you mentioned the economic power he has, the leverage that he has, and many people say he does enjoy a large amount of support in some parts of the country. How much will that work in his favor?
No, this is the point. I mean, the people, when the people are in a revolt, in a state of revolt, they don't care about the state of the economy and the money going here and going there. They care for their position now. Their position now is to fight Gaddafi. It has passed the point of just protesting or demanding. It is becoming a fight between them and the Gaddafi people. On the other hand, Gaddafi is not going to give up very easily. He's going to use all the power he has and all the ability he has in order to preserve his power, his situation. Unfortunately, this is done by his sons, not by members of the army. Unfortunately for him, because I think once the sons fail or don't get the agreement of the people with them, they're going to lose out.
Ian Black in London, the leverage that this regime has, particularly with the West, as far as the oil wealth and the financial deals and so on, how much of that is a factor in how the West responds to this? I mean, we have had quite a lot of criticism from Western leaders, and they've been pretty strident in that criticism. But will that be as far as it goes?
Well, I think that's a very important question. I've caught a change of tone in the last 24, 48 hours from Western governments as the scale of the violence, the state violence in Libya has become clear. And I think we have to go back and look at what's happened in recent years. Muammar Gaddafi was a pariah, essentially, internationally for many years. Libya spent years under sanctions to force the surrender. We all remember of the Lockerbie bombing suspects. Gaddafi, in his time in the 1970s, 1980s, supported terrorist groups or national liberation movements, whatever you want to call them, across the world, in the Middle East and in Europe, in Northern Ireland as well. After the war in Iraq, he gave up his WMD, his weapons of mass destruction program, and he made several very, very significant moves which seemed designed and had the effect of ensuring that his regime survived. He cleaned up his act internationally and became a welcome figure, or perhaps not welcome, but he would visit European capitals. He's been to Paris, he's been to Brussels, he's been to Rome. Tony Blair, when Prime Minister of Britain, paved the way for Gaddafi's rehabilitation by visiting Gaddafi in his tent, famously. And so Libya has cleaned up its act internationally. It's a very, very lucrative target for Western investment in the energy sector, in the construction sector. We remember the row over the release of Megrahi, the convicted Lockerbie bomber, in circumstances that seem to show very clearly the importance of business and trade with Libya.
Well, you say he's cleaned up his act, but was that just an act? And are we seeing the true colours of this regime in these protests?
The distinction I was going to make is exactly that. He's cleaned up his act internationally, but internally, domestically, Libya remains not only as repressive as ever, but with this extraordinary spate of violence, more repressive, crueler towards its own people than it's ever been seen to be before. So he bought his way to respectability internationally, and domestically very little changed. One of his sons, Ashur, was talking about the Gaddafi sons who play such an important role in different areas of life in Libya. Saif al-Islam, who for a while was the sort of favourite to succeed his father, has been kicked back in recent times. He had reformist instincts. He was more of a liberalizer. He took under his wing some limited openings in the media and for human rights, but he's been forced to step back. Another son, Mu'tasim, is the national security advisor. Khamis, we've heard a lot of in the last few days, commanding these special forces units allegedly involved in repressing the protests in Benghazi and elsewhere. So the deal has been Gaddafi gains respectability internationally, and at home it's the same old repression, now worse than ever. So we're seeing these alarmed responses from the Western governments who accepted that deal and chose to look away or to hold their noses at what was happening internally. They clearly can't do that now.
Ali Khan Satchu, with all of this wealth that we talked about earlier, surely there's enough for the regime to provide people with a decent standard of living, which is where these grievances and these protests originated from in the beginning.
Absolutely, and I think you're completely right. I mean, you could have an average GDP, annual GDP per Libyan of about $22,000 if you spread it out evenly. But the entire regime has not been built on an optimal structure for its 6.5 million people. It's been built on an optimal structure for a Gaddafi clan and for a narrow clique of people who controlled investments into Libya and controlled the entire Libyan apparatus. The problem now is that, you know, for such a regime to make an about turn at the speed that which is required, I think is the difficulty. It is as plain as day that this escalation has a point of no return, whether it's today or whether it's in a week's time, whether it takes a mass murder of the like we saw in Syria many years ago. But, you know, the point is we've moved into a new normal across the region. And I'm not sure that, you know, it's not really political analysis, it's more sort of psychiatric analysis of this individual. Can he move quick enough to do what is needed? And I'm not sure he can, because 41 years of sycophancy and being told you're the greatest and the most intelligent and the leader of the people is sure to turn anyone's head. And I think what you're witnessing now is exactly a result of that.
All right, just briefly in the few minutes that we have left, I want to ask all three of you how you see this whole thing playing out. It's only been a few days that we've seen these protests, what we've been able to see of it anyway. But Ashur Shams, do you see this going the same way as Tunisia and Egypt? I know you hope you do.
Well, I know the people inside Libya have been quiet and have been repressed for many years, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's something which is expected a long time ago but never happened. There were offers of reform, and there were talk of improving the situation. It has not improved for many years, and this is now has come out. It is not going to stop. Red lines have been passed. A red line of killing the Libyans killing Libyans and things like that. It's not going to stop here. And what, of course, Gaddafi is going to do is going to defend his power base. I agree with the psychologically, you know, how he behaves, and how he's a very strange, weird person, if you like, who might turn any time the opposite direction.
Ali Khan Satchu, how do you see this playing out over the next few days?
I think we've entered a new normal right across the Middle East. I think it's a trend change, and I think Libya is a holdout. It's a hermit kingdom. It's a black box. There's a lack of information. Egypt was on the other side, so this might take longer to play out. But I think ultimately we're witnessing the sinking of an old order, and when the new order comes into play, I'm not sure, but the old one, we've turned a page, and Gaddafi belongs in the 20th century. I can't see him adjusting quickly enough, and I think Western governments, it's interesting to see who's going to break out. I think David Cameron will break out. He was unhappy with Lockerbie anyway. I think he can come out and say it how it is. But I think, you know, for the Western governments, they can't hang back too much longer. Really, it's too obvious.
All right, briefly,
now,
Ian Black, we know we made this point before. Information is sketchy, but I mean, how do you see this playing out? Are we seeing the beginning of the end of this regime in Libya?
Well, I think we're seeing the beginning of the end, but I don't know how long it's going to take. I think would be the only certain thing I could say. I agree that this looks pretty irreversible, but a lot of people could die and many more bad things could happen before this very strange regime, very isolated, very idiosyncratic, recognizes that it's going the way of history. In the wake of these extraordinary events, Tunisia, Egypt, after all, Libya's two nearest neighbours have gone. But I don't think it's going to happen easily or quickly.
Well, it will certainly be interesting to see how all of this does play out, not only in Libya, but throughout the whole Middle East. But that is all we have time for. I want to thank all of our guests for taking part in the discussion. Ashur Shams, Ali Khan Satchu, and Ian Black. Many thanks for your time. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your feedback on this and any of the topics we've discussed. Remember, you can email your comments to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.